The sterile smell of a hospital at 3 in the morning usually means one of two things: a difficult birth or a lingering death. For Damien Costa, a man who controlled the city's underground shipping routes with a velvet glove and an iron fist, it meant someone was trying to take his entire world. When the panicked call came that his 5-year-old son had collapsed, Damien expected a war. He mobilized his most lethal enforcers, ready to tear the pediatric ward down to its foundations. But when he finally kicked open the door to room 412, expecting to find a cartel hit squad, he found a hospital cleaning lady. Armed with a shattered mop handle, bleeding heavily from her temple, she was standing directly over his sleeping boy. And she absolutely refused to move. Damien Costa did not panic. Panic was a luxury reserved for men who did not have targets on their backs, men who didn't manage a billion-dollar syndicate that stretched from the ports of New Jersey to the high-rises of Manhattan. At 34, Damien was a widow, a ruthless strategist, and a father. He had spent the last 3 years systematically cleansing his organization of the old volatile guard, shifting his family's wealth into legitimate real estate and international shipping. But peace always comes at a bloody price, and the wolves were always circling. It was 11:45 p.m. on a rain-slicked Tuesday. Damien was sitting in a dimly lit private dining room at Le Bernardin, swirling a glass of Macallan 25. Across the table sat 2 lieutenants from a rival faction in Brooklyn, men who were currently testing his patience over a disrupted shipment of electronics. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Then, his private cell phone vibrated. Only 3 people had this number: his underboss, his sister, and Mrs. Higgins, the live-in nanny who cared for his 5-year-old son, Leo. Damien held up a finger, silencing the men across from him, and answered. "Speak, Mr. Costa." Mrs. Higgins' voice was a frantic, breathless sob. "It's Leo. He collapsed. He couldn't breathe. His lips went blue. The ambulance is here. They're taking him to Lenox Hill. They said his heart." The glass of scotch slipped from Damien's fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. The Brooklyn lieutenants jumped, their hands instinctively reaching inside their jackets. But Damien didn't even look at them. His mind had already left the room. Leo had been born with a mild ventricular septal defect, a small hole in his heart that the doctors had sworn was closing on its own. He was supposed to be fine. He was supposed to be safe. "I am on my way," Damien said, his voice dropping an octave, turning cold and mechanical to mask the sheer terror clawing at his throat. He hung up and stood. "Meeting's over." Without waiting for a response, he strode out of the restaurant. His lead bodyguard, Elias, fell into step beside him instantly, reading the catastrophic shift in his boss's demeanor. "Lenox Hill Hospital," Damien barked as they climbed into the back of an armored Mercedes G-Wagon, waiting at the curb. "Tell the driver to run every red light. And call Luca. I want the entire 4th floor of that hospital locked down. Nobody gets in, nobody gets out. If the doctors have a problem with it, buy the hospital." The drive up the FDR Drive was a blur of neon lights and torrential rain. Damien stared out the window, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. In his world, coincidences did not exist. A sudden catastrophic health failure in his son, the very week he was negotiating a hostile takeover of the Brooklyn docks? It defied logic. Someone had gotten to Leo. Someone had bypassed the state-of-the-art security at his Long Island estate. If they touched him, Damien thought, his hands curling into fists, "I will burn this city to the ground." When the SUV screeched to a halt in the ambulance bay of Lenox Hill, Damien was out of the door before the vehicle had fully stopped. Elias and 3 other heavily armed men flanked him as he bypassed the emergency room triage, ignoring the protests of the night staff. He flashed a black titanium credit card and a look of pure murder at the head nurse. "Leo Costa. Where is he?" "Pediatric intensive care. 4th floor, room 412, the nurse stammered, intimidated by the imposing men in tailored suits. "But sir, visiting hours." Damien was already moving towards the elevators. The ride to the 4th floor felt like an eternity. The elevator hummed, a cheerful, mundane sound that mocked the violent thumping of Damien's heart. He drew his sidearm, a sleek, suppressed Glock 19, and held it down by his side. Elias did the same. If this was a hit, the assassins would be waiting at the choke points. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. Damien stepped out, expecting to see his advance team, the men Luca was supposed to have stationed at the perimeter. Instead, the hallway was eerily silent. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long, sickly shadows. At the end of the corridor, near the nurse's station, a security guard lay slumped over the desk. Beside him, one of Damien's own men, a seasoned enforcer named Bruno, was sprawled on the linoleum, a dark pool of crimson expanding from beneath his shoulder. Damien's blood ran cold. He had been right. It wasn't an illness. It was an assassination. "Secure the perimeter," Damien whispered to Elias. "Shoot anyone who isn't wearing scrubs. And if they are wearing scrubs and they run, shoot them in the legs." Damien moved down the hallway with terrifying speed, his eyes locked on the door of room 412. It was closed. The blinds were drawn. He didn't bother checking the handle. He took a step back, raised his right leg, and kicked the heavy wooden door with enough force to shatter the deadbolt. The door flew open, crashing against the interior wall with a deafening bang. Damien leveled his weapon, sweeping the room, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. "Get away from him!" a woman's voice screamed. Damien froze. The scene before him made absolutely no sense. The room was bathed in the dim, rhythmic blue glow of a telemetry monitor, tracing the steady, albeit weak, heartbeat of 5-year-old Leo. The boy was unconscious, an oxygen mask strapped over his pale face, an IV line snaking into his small arm. But it wasn't the boy that made Damien lower his weapon a fraction of an inch. Standing between the hospital bed and the doorway was a woman. She wasn't a cartel sicario. She wasn't a rival mobster. She was wearing standard-issue, faded blue hospital scrubs, a heavy canvas apron, and thick rubber gloves. Her dark hair was pulled back into a messy bun, but several strands were plastered to her forehead by a mixture of sweat and a steady stream of blood leaking from a deep gash above her left eyebrow. In her trembling hands, she held the jagged, splintered end of a heavy wooden mop handle. She had it leveled at Damien's chest like a spear. "I said, stay back," she yelled, her voice raw and cracking, though she didn't retreat.